Two coworkers were leaving the office late one evening when they heard the fire alarm suddenly begin blaring. A security guard came running down the hallway shouting, "Everyone out! Move!" One of the coworkers calmly stopped, opened his briefcase, and carefully switched from his dress shoes into a pair of running shoes. His friend looked at him in disbelief. "Steve, do you really think those running shoes are going to help you outrun an emergency?" Steve finished tying the laces, stood up with a smile, and said, "I don't have to outrun the emergency. I just have to get to the exit before you do." During a staff training session, the instructor was explaining the meaning of the word, definitely. To make sure everyone understood it, she asked the employees to use it in a sentence. One employee said, "Our project is definitely finished." The instructor smiled. "Well, not necessarily. There could still be changes or revisions." Another employee said, "Our manager is definitely in his office." She shook her head. "He could have stepped out, so that's not certain either." Finally, Dave raised his hand and asked, "Can an empty coffee mug still have coffee in it?" The instructor replied, "No, if it's empty, then it doesn't have any coffee." Dave nodded thoughtfully and said, "Then I definitely just drank someone else's coffee." Ryan spent a weekend visiting his elderly uncle at a remote mountain cabin. On the first morning, his uncle served pancakes and sausage for breakfast. Ryan noticed a few mysterious spots on his plate and asked, "Uncle Frank, are these dishes clean?" His uncle grinned. "They're as clean as the creek can make 'em. Now dig in." At lunchtime, Uncle Frank made homemade soup and fresh bread. Ryan looked at his bowl and noticed what appeared to be leftover oatmeal stuck to the side. Trying to be polite, he asked again, "Are you sure these dishes are clean?" His uncle smiled. "I already told you. They're as clean as the creek can make 'em." Later that afternoon, Ryan grabbed his backpack and headed for the front porch. A large old dog stepped in front of the door and refused to move. "Uncle Frank!" Ryan shouted. "Your dog won't let me out." From the other room his uncle yelled, "Creek! Move away from the door!" A college student walked into a neighborhood hardware store and asked the owner, "Do you happen to have any rechargeable batteries?" The owner smiled politely. "Sorry, we're sold out." The student thanked him and left. The next day, he came back. "Do you happen to have any rechargeable batteries?" "Not yet," the owner replied. "Maybe next week." On the third day, the student returned once again. "Do you happen to have any rechargeable batteries?" The owner finally lost his patience. "Listen, if you come in here asking about those batteries one more time, I'm going to tape you to that chair." The student nodded and quietly walked out. The following day, he came back again. "Do you sell tape?" The owner replied. "No." The student smiled. "Well then, do you happen to have any rechargeable batteries?" A businessman found himself seated next to an elderly farmer on a long train ride. Feeling confident, the businessman said, "How about a little quiz to pass the time? If I ask you a question and you can't answer it, you give me $5. If you ask me one that I can't answer, I'll give you $50. The farmer shrugged. "Sounds fair." The businessman went first. "What is the exact population of the deepest inhabited town on Earth?" The farmer smiled, reached into his pocket, and handed over $5 without a word. Then it was his turn. He asked, "What walks into a forest with 2 tails? And comes out with 3? The businessman frowned. He searched every book on his tablet. He called a few colleagues. He even checked online forums. Hours passed, but he couldn't find an answer anywhere. Finally, he sighed, pulled out his wallet, and handed the farmer $50. "Well," he said, "what's the answer?" The farmer quietly smiled, reached into his pocket, and handed him $5. A wealthy businessman walked into a neighborhood arcade and announced, I've got $500 for anyone here who can beat every level of that racing game without crashing once. The room went silent. Everyone looked at the game. But nobody stepped forward. Then one young guy quietly got up and walked out the front door. About 30 minutes later, he returned, walked over to the businessman, and asked, "Is that challenge still on?" "It sure is," the businessman replied. A crowd gathered as the game started. The young man raced through every track, dodged every obstacle, crossed every finish line, and completed the entire game without a single crash. The arcade exploded with cheers. The businessman, amazed, handed over the $500. "I've got to ask," he said. "Where did you disappear to for half an hour?" The young man grinned. "Oh, I went to the arcade across town to make sure I could do it first." Two retired neighbors had recently started forgetting little things. During a routine checkup, their doctor assured them they were both healthy but suggested, "When you think of something important, write it down. It'll save you a lot of frustration." That evening they were sitting on the front porch watching the sunset when one neighbor stood up. "I'm heading inside," he said. "Need anything?" His friend smiled. "Yeah, could you bring me a cup of coffee?" "Sure." "You'd better write it down." He laughed. "I can remember coffee." "Well, I'd like 2 sugars." "I'll remember." "And a splash of cream." The man rolled his eyes. "I've got it. Coffee, 2 sugars, and cream." He disappeared into the house. About 20 minutes later, he came back carrying a steaming bowl of chicken soup. His friend looked at it in complete confusion. After a long pause, he frowned and said, "Where are the crackers?" A city bus driver named Frank was in court after a serious traffic accident. The insurance company's sharp-dressed attorney questioned him. "Mr. Frank, isn't it true that when the police officer arrived you said, 'I'm fine'?" Frank nodded. "Well, I'll tell you what happened. I had just picked up my favorite regular passenger, Mrs. Wilson, when—" The lawyer interrupted. "Please answer yes or no. Did you say you were fine?" Frank tried again. "Like I was saying, Mrs. Wilson had just boarded the bus when—" The attorney cut him off once more. "Your Honor, I asked that the witness answer only the question." The judge leaned back. "No. I'd like to hear the rest of Mr. Frank's story." Frank smiled and continued. "A delivery truck ran a red light and slammed into the side of my bus. I ended up in one ditch. Poor Mrs. Wilson landed in another. I was hurt so badly I couldn't even stand. But I could hear Mrs. Wilson crying out in pain. A police officer arrived. He walked over to her first. One look told him her injuries were beyond help. Then he came over to me, still holding his notebook, looked me straight in the eye, and asked, 'So, how are you feeling?' Frank turned toward the judge and said, 'Your Honor, what would you have said?'" Two friends signed up for a week-long deep-sea fishing adventure on a remote island. At the end of the trip, they had caught far more giant tuna than expected. When the captain returned with his small fishing boat, he looked at the pile of fish and said, "Hold on, fellas. This boat can only safely carry 4 tuna." The two friends protested. "Come on. Last year we caught 6, and the captain took every one of them. Same size boat, too." The captain wasn't thrilled about it, but after listening to them insist for several minutes, he finally gave in. They loaded all 6 giant tuna onto the boat and headed for shore. The overloaded boat struggled through the waves, took on water, and finally rolled over. Fortunately, both fishermen managed to swim to a nearby sandbar. Catching their breath, one looked around and asked, "Any idea where we ended up?" His buddy glanced at the overturned boat, the floating tuna, and the shoreline, then nodded. "Yep. I'm pretty sure this is where we sank it last year." A park ranger was driving through a national park when he spotted a small tour bus crawling along the road. He pulled alongside and couldn't believe his eyes. The bus was packed with monkeys wearing tiny backpacks. The ranger switched on his lights and pulled the driver over. "Sir," he said, "what are you doing driving around with a bus full of monkeys? You need to take them to the wildlife sanctuary immediately." The driver nodded politely. "Yes, Ranger. I'll take care of it right away." The next afternoon, the ranger saw the very same bus. The same monkeys were still on board. Except now they were all wearing colorful sun hats and holding ice cream cones. The ranger pulled the bus over again. "I thought I told you to take those monkeys to the wildlife sanctuary." The driver smiled. "I did. They had a wonderful time. Today, I'm taking them to the amusement park." A city police officer was patrolling downtown when he spotted an old van driving unusually slowly. As he pulled alongside, he was amazed to see the van packed with llamas wearing colorful scarves. He switched on his lights and waved the driver over. "Sir," the officer said, "why are you driving around town with a van full of llamas? You need to take them to the petting zoo immediately." The driver smiled and nodded. "Yes, officer. That's exactly what I'll do." The following day, the officer saw the same van cruising through town again. The very same llamas were inside. Only this time they were all wearing sunglasses and beach hats. The officer stopped the van once more. "I thought I told you to take those llamas to the petting zoo." The driver laughed. "I did. They had a fantastic time. Today, we're taking a sightseeing tour." A traveler stopped at a small roadside motel and walked up to the front desk. "I'd like a room for the night," he said. The receptionist smiled. "Certainly, sir. That'll be just $5. $5? The traveler asked in disbelief. "Well, how much is dinner?" $3. "And breakfast?" $1. The traveler shook his head. "This place is unbelievably cheap. Is the owner around? I'd love to compliment him." The receptionist pointed toward the second floor. "He's upstairs. With my husband." The traveler looked puzzled. "What's he doing with your husband?" The receptionist smiled and replied. "The same thing I'm doing to his motel down here." I used to work at a small cafe across the street from the courthouse. One afternoon, a man walked in still wearing a wrinkled business suit, carrying a briefcase stuffed with paperwork. He looked exhausted. I asked what he'd like. Without hesitation, he said, "I'll have 3 cheeseburgers, 4 orders of fries, 2 milkshakes, a slice of pie, and 6 coffees." I looked around. He was sitting completely alone. Still, an order's an order. I brought everything out. He ate like a man who hadn't seen food in weeks. Burger after burger. Fries disappeared. The pie vanished. And every drop of coffee was gone. When he finally leaned back, he sighed and said, "I really shouldn't have done that." I asked, "Why not?" He reached into his pocket, counted a few coins, and replied, "Because I've only got enough money for the coffee." An elderly couple walked into an upscale furniture showroom, only to discover that the luxury recliner they had been saving for had already been sold. The husband frowned and said to the salesman, "I thought you promised to hold that recliner until we came back with the full $6,000. But I just overheard you say you sold it to that young lady for only $5,000. You told us there were absolutely no discounts." The salesman smiled sheepishly. "Well, she had the money ready. And honestly, just look at her. How could I say no?" Just then, the young woman walked over carrying the receipt. She handed it to the elderly man and smiled. "Here you go, Grandpa. I told you I could talk him into lowering the price." She winked at the salesman and added, "Thanks for the family discount. Even if you didn't know it." A man is served whiskey on a flight. The flight attendant asks the priest seated next to him whether he would like a drink too. "Priest, I would rather be raped by a dozen prostitutes than let liquor touch my lips." The man returns the drink, saying, "Me too. I didn't know we had a choice." After a serious bicycle accident, a man spent months recovering from a badly injured leg. Although he was expected to walk again, he became discouraged and convinced life would never be the same. One afternoon, while sitting alone in a city park, he noticed a man in a wheelchair across the path. The man was smiling, rocking back and forth, and swaying from side to side as if he were dancing to music only he could hear. The sight made him stop and think. If he can be that happy, he thought, what excuse do I have for giving up? Feeling inspired, he walked over. "Sir," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. I've been feeling sorry for myself ever since my accident. But seeing you over here smiling and moving around like that reminded me there's still plenty to be thankful for." The man in the wheelchair kept rocking from side to side. The fellow asked, "So what's your secret? How do you stay so positive?" The man sighed and replied, "Positive? I'm not being positive. I've got an itch in the middle of my back, and I can't reach it." The cup of coffee had been sitting untouched for nearly an hour. A man sat at a quiet cafe table, staring into it as though it held all the answers. Then a loud, confident businessman walked over, picked up the cup, took one long sip, finished the whole thing, and smirked. "Well," he said, "I just drank your coffee. What are you going to do about it?" The man suddenly burst into tears. The businessman looked embarrassed. "Whoa. I was only joking. I didn't mean to upset you. I hate seeing someone cry." The man wiped his eyes. "This has been the worst day of my life. I overslept this morning and missed the biggest job interview I've ever had. On the way home, my bicycle was stolen. Then I realized I'd left my phone on the bus. When I finally got home, the apartment was flooded from a burst pipe. To top it all off, my landlord called to tell me the rent was going up." The businessman shifted awkwardly. "So I came here," the man continued, "mixed something deadly into my coffee, and spent the last hour trying to find the courage to drink it." He looked at the empty cup. "And then, you drank it." The front door swings open. Something small waddles inside. And every head in the bar slowly turns. A duck hops onto a stool and says, "I'll have a beer and a ham sandwich, please." The bartender stares at him and says, "Wait a minute, you're a duck." The duck looks around and says, "Wow, your eyesight's working fine." The bartender blinks. "And you can talk?" The duck nods. "Ears are working too, huh? Now, about that beer and sandwich?" Still stunned, the bartender pours the beer, makes the sandwich, and sets them down. "Sorry," he says. "It's just, we don't get many ducks in here. What brings you around?" "I'm working at the construction site across the street," says the duck. "I'm a plasterer." The bartender can't believe it, but he keeps quiet as the duck opens a newspaper, eats his sandwich, sips his beer, and leaves a few dollars on the counter before heading out. This goes on every day for 2 weeks. Same duck, same order, same routine. Then one afternoon, the circus comes to town. The ringmaster stops in for a drink, and the bartender says, "Hey, you run the circus, right? You'll never believe this. I've got a duck customer who talks, drinks beer, eats sandwiches, reads the newspaper, the whole bit. He'd be perfect for your show." The ringmaster's eyes light up. "That's amazing. Here's my card. Have him call me." The next day, when the duck waddles in, the bartender says excitedly, "Hey, I got you a great opportunity. Big money, steady work." The duck says, "I'm listening." "Where is it?" "At the circus," says the bartender, grinning. The duck looks puzzled. "The circus? You mean, that place with the big tent?" "That's the one. With the animals in cages and the performers living in trailers?" "Exactly. With the canvas roof and a hole in the middle?" "Right again." The duck stares at him for a long moment, shakes his head, and says, "Buddy, what in the world would they want with a plasterer?" An elderly man accidentally bumped a luxury SUV while pulling into a grocery store parking space. The younger driver jumped out, furious. "Look what you did to my truck! You're going to pay me $10,000 right now, or I'm going to make you regret it." The old man looked frightened. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't have that kind of money. Let me call my son. He's in Special Forces. He'll know what to do." "Special Forces?" The younger man laughed. "Yeah, right." He snatched the phone from the old man's hand. "So you're in Special Forces?" he shouted into it. "Well, your old man just hit my truck. You'd better get here with 10 grand. Or I'm going to put both of you in the hospital." A calm voice replied. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Exactly 10 minutes later. A pickup truck screeched into the parking lot. A man jumped out, walked straight over to the bully, and dropped him to the ground before he knew what happened. As the younger man lay there groaning, the son turned to his father and sighed. "Dad, for the last time. I'm a Navy SEAL. I rescue hostages. I don't train sea lions." An elderly mountain man stopped by a small country chapel to speak privately with the pastor. When they were alone, he said, "Pastor, many years ago, during a terrible flood, a young woman from a nearby village came to my cabin begging for shelter. The roads were underwater, and she had nowhere else to go. So I let her stay in my spare room." The pastor smiled warmly. "My friend, that was a kind and generous thing to do. There's nothing wrong with that." The old man nodded slowly. "Well, after a while we became rather fond of each other. Very fond. We spent quite a bit of time together while she was stranded." The pastor thought for a moment before replying. "You were both facing a frightening situation. People don't always make perfect decisions during difficult times. If you're sincerely sorry, you're forgiven." The old man let out a relieved sigh. "Thank you, Pastor. That makes me feel much better." Then he scratched his head and asked, "One more thing." "Of course," the pastor replied. "Do you think it's about time I told her the roads reopened years ago?" George went to his doctor for a routine checkup. After reviewing the test results, the doctor looked up and said, "George, you're going to need knee replacement surgery." George smiled. "Well, that's easy. My daughter is one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the state. She'll do it." The doctor shook his head. "Most surgeons prefer not to operate on close family members. It's usually better to let someone else handle it." George wouldn't budge. "Nope. I want my daughter." A few days later, his daughter sat down with him. "Dad," she said, "why are you insisting that I do your surgery? I work with excellent surgeons. Any one of them could do just as good a job." George grinned. "They don't have the same motivation you do." She raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" George leaned back and said, "If one of them messes it up, your mother will still be living with me. But if you mess it up, she's moving in with you." A man walked into a rural medical clinic covered in scratches, sporting a black eye, and wearing a neck brace. The doctor stared at him for a moment and asked, "Good grief. What happened to you?" The man sighed. "My wife and I were out hiking in the countryside. We stopped near a pasture to enjoy the view when I noticed one of the sheep had something caught in its wool. So I walked over to take a closer look. I gently pulled the wool aside and found a baseball cap wedged in there." The doctor nodded. "So how did that lead to all this?" The man shook his head. "I made one very bad decision. I held up the cap and shouted, 'Honey, doesn't this look just like the one you lost?'" The doctor smiled. "And then?" The man sighed. "After that, everything went black." An elderly mother with failing eyesight had 3 loving sons. Each one wanted to give her the perfect birthday present, and secretly hoped to become her favorite. The oldest son bought her a magnificent country mansion with beautiful gardens. He smiled proudly and said, Mom deserves the very best. The second son chose comfort. He bought her a luxury sedan with a personal chauffeur on call 24 hours a day. Now she'll never have to worry about transportation again, he said. The youngest son knew he needed something truly unique. After searching for months, he found an extraordinary parrot that had been trained by monks. The bird had memorized every chapter of the Bible. Simply mention a book or a verse, and the parrot would recite it flawlessly. A week after receiving the gifts, the mother called each of her sons. To the oldest she said, "My dear, the house is beautiful. But it's far too large for me. I only use one room." To the second she said, "The car is wonderful. But I hardly ever go anywhere anymore. And I feel awkward having a chauffeur waiting on me." Finally, she called her youngest son. "My sweet boy. You were the only one who truly understood what your mother wanted." The youngest smiled from ear to ear. "You really liked the parrot?" "Oh yes," she replied. "It was delicious. The little chicken was cooked perfectly."